Good morning and welcome to the Sports Carnival live from the Trauma Center studios, where the only thing better than getting paid to play a kid's game is getting paid to talk about grown men playing a kid's game. Here's your host, Dave Carney.
So I sort of resemble that remark, Chad Forrester. Thanks a lot. Hey, listen, some people have it and some people don't. That's why we're doing the Sports Carnival, and we've got so many of our friends watching us and or listening to us as the Sports Carnival continues to expand. Chad, I gotta pat ourselves on the back just a bit here, man. We are growing this bad boy fast. I mean, fast. If you love the Sports Carnival, which I hope you do, you're going to have more ways to love this bad boy on Podbean, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and coming up soon, pretty much every single podcast platform, from what we are being told, is going to be carrying the Sports Carnival. Pretty exciting stuff, man.
Really?
Yes.
We're getting every single one.
Pretty soon. We got to go through a verification process, but we're getting there.
Well, no pressure, though. No pressure.
No
Whatever.
pressure.
Yeah, okay.
Hey,
Well,
we've got no pressure here.
I'm here, but I have to be honest with you. I'm a little tired.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay.
You're getting back into the saddle. You see, you got to remember, we live in the future in the state of Wisconsin. Chad lives in, well, I guess, no, actually, would we live in the future and you live in the past, but your future hasn't, I don't know. We're going to not time travel too far, but it's early where Chad is. It's early where we are, but it is earlier where Chad is.
Yeah, don't go down that wormhole. I don't know if that has something to do with the CERN. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but
fucking daylight savings time. Glad that thing's over. By the way, what are your thoughts on that? This is
I don't think it's over here. It's not over.
This is national. As soon as the clocks go backwards, that's it. There's no more daylight savings time.
So this is the last time.
Yeah, this is the last daylight savings time. How does that land with you?
I love that. That's so stupid. I know that 1 hour, it's not really that big of a deal, but it is kind of a pain in the ass to remember, and it doesn't really make any sense. It's not the 1800s. We don't really need to do that anymore. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I get why we did it. I understand that. I had a lot to do with farming and, making sure you get enough time during the day to be able to see, to do and plant and all that kind of stuff. But not a fan. Okay,
well, it's gone. So apparently UWL's Thomas and Neil the Duda, who is actually going to get a very special debut this morning on the Sports Carnival. Neil the Duda has got a couple of rap bangers, and we're going to play them for you. Even though it's not Hip Hop Hump Day yet, we are going to play them for you. Chad, we've got a big show lined up here this morning on the Sports Carnival. This is only the 4th episode, and yet it feels like we are taking a stratospheric leap, because coming up this morning on the program, one of my audience's favorite guests, Bob Iback, is going to be joining the program, barring any technical difficulties. Bob's not exactly a spring chicken, but Bob's going to join the program this morning at about 8:30, and we'll talk to Bob about the Major League Baseball playoffs. Chad, Bob is such an interesting guy, and I've told you about this off air. He's a sports author, a sports journalist, was the PR director of the Cubs. His grandfather was Lou Gehrig's valet. So this guy was born in Brooklyn, played his college basketball at Maryland, has stories about the pickup basketball games that he got to participate with Wilt Chamberlain, Jerry West, and all this, the who's who of the NBA's, all-time hierarchy. And then Bob wrote this incredible book with the former Clemson head coach, Tate's Lock, called Caught in the Net. And really what that story was about was the illegal recruiting of Tree Rollins, who in Blue Chips was portrayed by Shaquille O'Neal, and what exactly the University of Clemson did, Chad, to try to make it seem like they had black players on campus when in fact they did not, in order to recruit these players and pay them ridiculous money. The point of it is, Bob Iback, for those that have never heard this man, never seen him before, Bob Iback is one of the most interesting guests that we have ever had on the program, at least in my career, and I cannot wait, Chad, for you to get a chance to meet him today. It's going to be awesome.
Let me ask you this. When you said valet, do you mean, so he was Lou Gehrig's valet, like the guy that parks his car? Or do you mean like old school valet, like a butler, kind of like that followed him around?
Yeah, well, I think a little bit of both, to be fair. I don't know, because we didn't dig too much into that, but I feel like, back in those days, Lou Gehrig was they barely had cars when Lou Gehrig was playing baseball, right? That was a fairly new invention. People looked at that horseless wagon and said, Jesus, is this going to really stick? And it did. So I think Bob's grandfather probably did a lot of things like that, carrying bags, possibly.
Not to steal away from Dennis Leary, but Lou Gehrig died of Lou Gehrig's disease. How did you not see that coming?
I know. And that's something.
All right.
All right. So not only
say that, man.
Not only do we get to talk to Bob Iback this morning at right about 8:30, we've also got to dig in, Chad, right when we get back here on the Sports Carnival, to Devante Adams being charged with assault after pushing this, I guess, camera operator, photographer, boom mic guy in Kansas City after the Raiders lost. We've also got some sports bets to share with you. Chad and I have been digging through some of these lines, which have moved quite a bit since we talked to John Denton on Tuesday. Stay tuned. Coming back, Sports Carnival broadcasting live from the Trauma Center studios. I can't imagine a week going by without going to the Recovery Room Bar and Grill, 7th and Mississippi Street in downtown La Crosse. I'm serious. If you know me, you know that my favorite restaurant, not just my favorite bar, but my favorite restaurant in all of downtown La Crosse, Wisconsin, is none other than the Recovery Room Bar and Grill. Whether it's their burgers, their pizza, their wings, their gyros, their prime rib, or their fish, it's all good. And the wait staff, my gosh, some of the friendliest and coolest people that you'll ever meet. Matt, the owner, great friend of mine. The Recovery Room, 7th and Mississippi Street. I can't go a week without it. How about you?
Got to let that breathe a little bit. Back to the action live from the Trauma Center studios. This is the Sports Carnival. Yeah. Now for the guy who put the magic back into his Johnson. Here's your host, Dave Carney.
Neil, the Duda, giving us the jams here this morning on the Sports Carnival, baby. I love it.
Listen to that.
Neil,
Listen to the lyrics.
Cause it ain't over. It's our squad. And we rollers. So get fucked up.
Wow.
No one, so
Parental guidance may be suggested on that one.
What isn't it? Parental guidance is questioned. It's like, wait, what? Listen, Neil Duda is one of my favorite dudes here in the region, Chad. Neil's also, this is a shameless plug, Neil's also a wedding DJ. So if you're looking for something like that at your nuptials, you got to find Neil Duda. He's all over our social media. Basically, you find at Neil Duda, and you'll be able to link up with him.
He's like the wedding singer?
He's sort of, except for the wedding rapper.
Actually, not a bad. If you're going to, Adam Sandler has a lot of great movies.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of shitty movies, and that actually is one that's pretty decent. Wedding Singer's a pretty decent one.
Before some of his newer movies, Chad, in which he's sort of taken a little bit more of a serious turn, because he's done some great shit on Netflix recently. I mean, that film, what was it, Hidden Gems with Kevin Garnett in it on Netflix. Have you seen that movie?
I've been meaning to watch it, but then I got rid of Netflix, so I haven't seen it.
Dude, I'm going to have to, listen, don't let the Netflix people see us. I'm going to have to share my fucking password with you, because that thing's worth watching. Listen, that was such a great movie. And it's not that he's unfunny, but he plays a more serious turn. Kevin Garnett was fantastic in that movie. And boy, you don't see the ending of it coming. So I would recommend that you watch it. But prior to these recent slate of movies, I agree. The Wedding Singer was one of his few that really kind of stood the test of time. And it's a Drew Barrymore effect, because 50 First Dates with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore, I thought that also sort of stood the test of time.
50 First Dates, that's the one there in Hawaii, and she has a bad memory, and they have to recreate their love over and over again.
Every single time. Yep. Basically the Notebook, but with Adam Sandler.
But with humor.
Right. Speaking of humor, Chad, I want to jump into this humorous situation. And I know that it's not humorous to him, because he's going to have to get lawyered up and all this kind of nonsense. But I want to talk about what is becoming a very humorous situation in Kansas City with this guy that got pushed by Devante Adams. Now, we don't have the rights to show you the actual video from that night again, but I do want to point something out as we've got this graphic up right now. There is some clarification that came in last evening from Ian Rappaport. But let's start off with this. Devante Adams, Chad, we talked about this on Tuesday morning. It looked like on initial blush, he was coming up because we had the overhead camera, right? It looked like Devante Adams was simply coming off the field in frustration after he had a monster game, but the Raiders lose by a point to Kansas City, and just outwardly shoves this guy holding a microphone, a boom mic, or a camera. I can't recall exactly, but it was one of those things now, and it looked bad. After the game, Devante, before he answers any questions from reporters, starts off with look, I pushed this guy. I didn't see him. I should have never done it. Well, this guy, according to TMZ, was transported, Chad, to the hospital to be treated with whiplash and a headache and possibly a stuffy nose, a minor concussion. And also he was looked at for gout because he's been eating high caloric foods. The thing is this, On the initial look, it wasn't good, Chad. It looked bad. But yesterday, we saw the field view. Devante Adams was not looking up. He had his helmet buried in the ground in shame, as he should. The Raiders are fucking awful right now. And as he's walking off, this guy scurries right in front of him at like a breakneck pace. And Devante, in his surprise, looks up and does he give the guy a good chest check? Yes, he does. Yes, he does. But I couldn't see anything, especially on the second view, that would have warranted whiplash, a concussion. He didn't hit his head on the ground. It wasn't that bad. Now, Ian Rappaport did clarify, as I mentioned last evening, that Devante Adams isn't actually being charged with assault, misdemeanor assault, which is actually what the initial report was, Chad. He's being charged with a city ordinance violation, which is a little bit lower than a state misdemeanor assault charge. Per the prosecutor's office, it carries a fine of $250 to $1,000 or 180 days in jail or both, which he's not doing. He's not going to jail. That's not going to happen. And by the way, this guy holding the boom mic, never, ever, 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 ever going to work in the NFL again. Over.
Yeah, I'm guessing that if this would have happened in Vegas, we wouldn't be talking about this. But the fact that it happened in Kansas City by the opposing team, that's why it's happening partially. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I think that, and the fact that it was caught on television first and the overhead look was so bad, and it really was. The overhead look was not great for Devante Adams. And I think this guy seized on an opportunity and said, I smell a chance for me to make more in a single sitting, perhaps, than I'll make in the rest of my career here. I'm going for it. But you know what? It's not going to work. It really won't. It's not going to work. And it's unfortunate because Devante Adams will just be dealing with this. It'll be a minor inconvenience for him. This guy is a pariah now. And I don't know any college or any NFL team or any organization that would now want him out there, because what does it say to you? You've got a litigious dude just waiting for something like this to happen that'll try to make something happen in order to try to cash in. He's now going to be completely off limits.
Well, and he's a freelance guy. So now he's got a career of covering dog shows and boat shows, and, the state fair. He's not, yeah, you're right. When it comes to the NFL, or any sporting event, especially, the fact that you're not attached to anybody legitimate, I'm not that he's not legitimate, but being a freelance guy, you got to be doing some networking too, right? So you're kind of your own boss, if you will, and you want to make sure you leave a good impression. So yeah, he's just kind of screwed his career. Now, granted, he might be able to sue maybe and make some money that way, but no, he's now marginalized, and again, he's going to be relegated to doing those things I just listed.
So think about this. If what we saw from Ian Rappaport is true, which I believe it is, Rappaport doesn't really post anything on his social media feed until it is official and verified. If the city ordinance violation carries a fine of $250 to $1,000, well, this guy is not going to get anything in a court of law, because if that's the actual technical violation, right, there's not anything beyond that could really be assigned to him. So at this point, he is now... He's opened up a can of worms that for himself personally, this photographer guy or boom mic operator, he's opened up a can of worms for himself that will this is going to end up aging a lot worse on this guy than it does on Devante Adams, who, by the way, is having a stellar season right now for the Raiders. I know the Raiders are not playing well. Devante had 129 yards and a couple of touchdowns, has had over 400 yards, 29 catches this year for the Raiders. He's doing okay. The team's not doing great. He's going to be fine, but this guy is going to be a complete pariah. He'll never, ever, ever be able to work in the NFL again.
Well, I think there's a couple of frustrations with Devante Adams. Obviously, the team's success, his individual success, and specifically on that last play, he got jammed at the line, apparently, is what he said, and he missed his route. And so I think he was pissed off at himself. And all of those things, we've all been through that, especially when you're in sports and you're a competitor and you want to win and you're trying to make a good impression, right? You've come to town, you're making all this money. I mean, I get all those things. He's just handled it the wrong way. It's at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. And I don't know if you saw Soul Surfer here. He says, I'm not trying to start anything here, but the guy was probably from Minnesota, being soft and all.
Yeah, Jason, that's a really good point. I mean, we all know that the folks in Minnesota, not as tough as the folks in Wisconsin. Listen, I doubt that's the case. I just think that it's a really interesting sort of a snapshot into society in general, right? Because we have these athletes, and we talked about this a bit yesterday, a different situation completely and entirely with Brett Favre, though, and how Brett Favre, as implicated as he may be in this Mississippi welfare scandal situation, all right, which it looks to be pretty deep as far as the implications are concerned. But as implicated as Brett Favre is, he still wouldn't be the person that started that particular welfare scam, right? He still wouldn't be the guy that initiated the welfare scam. Will he be the most famous person to fall on the sword of public opinion? Because nobody knows who the other people are and nobody cares, right? Except for, I don't know, politicos in the know in Mississippi, which, what are those, 12 people? I mean, sitting around the Mississippi politicos, that's like a dozen fucking people. So Brett's going to be the most famous person to fall on the sword. But I guess the overall societal grab is this. We now have such an interestingly litigious society that as soon as something maybe appears to be in your favor for a snatch and grab job on somebody who's got a little bit more than you, it's like go time. If it was me, Chad, personally, I would have apologized to Devante Adams. I would have gotten up and said, oh my God, I am so sorry. I cannot believe this, because you and I both know, working behind the scenes on these kinds of things, you're not supposed to get in these people's ways. You're supposed to throw yourself 50 feet out of the way just so you don't touch them. I mean, that guy's worth how much money to the Raiders? What if he tripped on this dude, broke his leg, and then the Raiders are sitting on a lemon? What then?
Well, but I don't think the guy did it intentionally. Obviously, this is a reaction. The other thing that you could say about that, yeah, you're right. People are overly litigious. But the other part of this, unfortunately, is in both of these cases that you mentioned, Brett Favre and with Devante Adams, we have a tiered legal system as well. So people like Devante Adams and Brett Favre, who are famous athletes with lots of money, aren't going to pay the same consequences that you and I would pay in that situation if that would have proceeded, which it probably wouldn't proceed the same way because you and I don't have Brett Favre and Devante Adams money. So it's multi-layered there, but we do have you would agree with that, right? It's not equal under the law, as they say. If you've got money, you get away with it.
Well, isn't that what the whole balance of justice is, right? It's like which arm fills up the fastest with the money, and that's the winning side. I mean, really,
dollars, yes.
Really, and that's not a shot on people with dough. It's just like this, it costs money to have lawyers, and people with more money can keep filing more papers, and at some point you just run out of money. Somebody does first, and you're right, it does skew. The thing about Devante in this situation, that does need to be mentioned, because as much as I think this guy is like Special K was talking about here, making a gutless money grab, the thing about Devante is this, though. You shouldn't put your hands on people, right? Like that's another thing that we do have to put out here. You shouldn't put your hands on people. Now, do I think that this rises to the level of what this guy's trying to do, like a gutless money grab? No, I don't. But if you're Devante, this is a time for some self-reflection too, right? Like, where am I, in between the ears? Where's my gray space that when I'm walking off, that's what I do? Because that wasn't the only reaction that he could have made. I'm not saying it's the worst thing that's ever happened, but it wasn't the only reaction.
Well, there is other repercussions, and I don't think that it's been finalized yet, but I think there'll be punishment handed down from the NFL as well, and that possibly could be game suspension and fines. So, I mean, at the end of the day, Devante Adams' career in the Raider Nation is not starting off all that great. I guess a lot of Green Bay fans are probably sitting there going, "See, I told you so. Why'd you leave, you bastard?" So, which makes it fun and interesting, and part of the reason why we're talking about this. I think he can recover. Me personally, I don't have anything against the guy. I'm pulling for him, right? I hope he can pull this out. I hope he can right the ship and have a good career. But I do think, and I think we talked about this yesterday, he made the wrong decision. At the end of the day, did you see how I dropped that? At the end of the day, he made the wrong decision.
That's called a Joe DeGuano mic drop. Boom.
That was a shout out to Joe.
There you go. Speaking of Joe DeGuano, if Joe's listening to us this morning, what up, man? You're just as famous now as you ever were, and thank you so much for coming on. We are getting some interaction here, Chad, with Bob Iback on my Facebook page. As I sort of thought, there was an outlying possibility here that clicking a link on either an email address or a Facebook page might not be something that Bob was really up to. And we thought we had this worked out last night. I will say this. If Bob doesn't come on, we still have a lot of Major League Baseball stuff to talk about. As a matter of fact, Chad, I want to get our audience members tuned up for what we have coming up. Major League Baseball today and tomorrow. We had some really exciting games yesterday. The Major League Baseball postseason is a lot of fun. And I know Bob would want to talk about this, and we're still working on it, guys. The technical issues with Mr. Iback, though, I did sort of anticipate as a possibility. The outlier was definitely out there. Okay, so yeah, we've got our baseball playoff update here. Last night, the Atlanta The Atlanta Braves beat Philadelphia 3-0. The Padres got the best of the Dodgers, Chad, 5-3. Coming up today. This is in the Central Time, so this isn't going to look right for you. 2:37 p.m. out here for us, and that will be 12:37 for you out there in the Pacific. Seattle at Houston. Then you've got the Guardians, worst name ever, against the New York Yankees. The Yankees are up in that series 1-0. Houston leads Seattle, of course, after that. Just incredible walk-off, 1-0.
It's a choke.
It was a choke job. I get you. But Houston's one of these teams that, I realize they're cheaters and they bang the drum all day. It's like a fucking Todd Rundgren song with how they go about stealing their signs. But Houston's a good ball club. And Justin Verlander, Chad, who I think led the major leagues in ERA this year with a 1.73 ERA. Justin Verlander is a guy that years ago, when he was getting out of Detroit, I talked about a lot on the program, is like a potential target for the Milwaukee Brewers. Would he have enough left in the tank, though, at that advanced age, after all of what he had already done for Jim Leyland and those Tigers for so many years? Would he have enough left in the tank? This guy has been nothing short of spectacular with Houston. And I would say that in my estimation right now, Houston's probably a favorite over the Yankees if those two were to meet in the American League, in the American League Championship Series. I think that Houston's a really deep, really good team.
Let me correct you. Not if they meet. When they meet, you mean? That's inevitable. Yankees probably arguably the best team in baseball. Aaron Judge is amazing. That whole lineup is amazing. Giancarlo Stanton. I mean, you think about all the guys on that roster. Seattle, I'm pulling for them, but I have a feeling that after blowing that lead, which they clearly should have won that game, that's gonna deflate them a lot. That's gonna be hard to bounce back from, in my opinion. I think Houston ends up, possibly sweeping that. I mean, it's only a best of 5, so all they have to do is win 2 more games. And I don't see that being a problem. They have a better pitching staff. So I think that's going to happen. And I think Houston at New York will be a really good series. And I think you can pretty much lock that in. I hate to be that guy, but I'm going to be that guy.
Listen, I don't think that you're off base when you have that sort of prediction, because I do too. I was really excited for the Seattle Mariners, and I know that you were too, and everybody in the area. Well, maybe you weren't because you're the contrarian, but I know that so many people here were super excited for the Mariners because, as I've mentioned, Scott Service is one of our own out here in the Cooley region from Westby High School. Now,
best friends.
Yeah, right. We're best friends. I think he hated the guy that I used to do a show with, man. Seriously, because he would never take our calls. Our good buddy, Matt Ellens, the owner of the Recovery Room, who powers the Trauma Center Studios, checking in here. And he did make a correction. He meant Northwest, not Northeast. But he asked you a question, Chad. What would be better for the Northwest, the Mariners winning the series or the Sonics making a comeback? That's a great question, Matty.
Well, you're asking a personal question. If you're asking a personal question, I'm going to always go for the Sonics. I was a huge Sonics fan. I went to many Sonics games in the Coliseum. In fact, in 1993, I went to the Western Conference Finals. I think it might have been game 3 because Phoenix had home court. Charles Barkley absolutely destroyed the Sonics, and I was there live, which I was kind of split. Obviously, I was pulling for the Sonics, but I'm a huge Charles Barkley fan. And it was cool to watch him play and to dominate. But most definitely getting the Sonics back, in my opinion. Obviously, the Mariners going to the World Series would be huge. Don't get me wrong. But we have a lot of bandwagon people in this area. All of a sudden, everybody's got Mariner gear on. And I'm like, where were you last year? What's going on here? You know what I mean?
It's interesting, the correlation between Seattle baseball and Milwaukee baseball. Now, you're familiar, right? The Seattle Pilots were the first major league team in Seattle, right? They became the Milwaukee Brewers. So it was actually Seattle's first major league team comes out here to Milwaukee, and then they take the place of the Braves, who had moved from Milwaukee down to Atlanta with Hammer and Hank Aaron. So I always like to see what folks out in the Northwest do think about baseball versus basketball. But, I'll tell you, just from my own professional experience, Matt, I would say the Sonics coming back to Seattle would also be the bigger deal. And there was something about the Seattle Supersonics for so many years. I mean, you go back to their, inception, and what was that, the 1970s, or like after the ABA NBA merger, I think is when the Sonics came on, right?
1977, 6. I can't remember. They won the championship in 79.
They did, with Lenny Wilkins,
Dennis Johnson, yes. God rest his soul, who later, had fame with the Celtics. Was the MVP of that game.
Was Jack Sikma on that team?
Jack Sikma, I believe, was on that team as well. Downtown Freddie Brown. Yeah. Yes. I mean, they've got a great history. Lenny Wilkins was a player coach at one time and then became the winningest coach in NBA basketball. it was just a great team. Yeah, Jack Sikma was a great, and James Donaldson. I mean, there were so many great players on that team and great history, and it just sucked when they left. And, of course, you had what's his name that was part of that team that later became the Thunder. Why can't I think of his name right now?
The Thunder. Oh, what are you talking about? The Thunder coach?
No, player. Why can't I think of his name? Kevin Durant. Yeah. So not only do you lose the team, you lose one of the greatest players, maybe a top 15 guy of all time. So it's like insult to injury a little bit.
Yeah. Oh, don't think about just Kevin Durant not being there. And I know that people have all sorts of opinions about Russell Westbrook, but that dude's still a baller. Okay. I mean, you average a triple-double for a few seasons, you're good. So the Sonics would have had Russell Westbrook, okay, Kevin Durant, James Harden, not Steven Adams, but Nick Collison. Nick Collison's interesting because he was a Supersonic that then went on to play the rest of his career with Oklahoma City and has his number retired like in a Supersonics jersey, which is just very interesting. It's so weird to see Supersonic stuff down in Oklahoma City. It really is. That'll never land with me. But I thought that was a great question by Matt, that's for sure. While we've just got a second here, I just want to pause it and thank our friends, Chad, that have helped bring the show to our audience this morning. Preferred Insurance of La Crosse is today's presenting sponsor. Our good buddy Tony over there is looking to help you out if you need auto, home, life, flood, disability, or business insurance. They're on King Street, downtown La Crosse. It's Preferred Insurance Agency, the official insurance agency partner of the Sports Carnival. The Midwest Mortgage Team, Mike Garcia and Todd Vercuse, the official mortgage lending partner of the program, and our official real estate agent of the show as well, Kyle Cable, One Trust Real Estate. You don't know this, Chad, but Kyle's dad, Kenny Cable, was the longtime University of Wisconsin-La Crosse's basketball coach. This guy had a lot of success out here, remains to this day in a different capacity with the university, but his dad was an incredible coach. And Kyle, I don't think that he'll ever go on the pro tour because he's got too many other things going. Kyle's going to end up being a Division I referee. Right now he's doing Division III, doing some high school. He'll end up being a D1 referee, but Kyle is also a near scratch golfer. He is one of those dudes that if you and I were to go out, which we would suck, we bring this guy, we dress him up like in some shitty attire. And, he's doing the Woody Harrelson, putting the club behind his head, warming up. And, all of a sudden we're like, hey, we're going to bring Kyle out and,
So Kyle's got to be in shape. I'll tell you what, being a ref, that's one of those jobs you don't really think about. If you pay attention, you go to a basketball game, you watch those guys.
Yeah.
Those guys are getting up and down the court. You got to be in pretty good shape. Then, of course, you got to have some mental acuity. You have to have good eyesight. And then you got to put up with a lot of bullshit. That's the other thing that people probably don't realize. You're getting yelled at the whole game.
All true things. There really is no win because you're not a part of the game, but you are a part of the game. People hate you. It doesn't matter what you do. Somebody, one half of the people watching that particular contest think that you were incorrect in all of what it is that you did. I have a lot of respect for officials. I really do. One guy that I've just got a lot of respect for now in the NBA officiating ranks is one of my favorite former, hard-working players, Haywood Workman. Haywood Workman was a really good guard back in the day, right? And Haywood Workman has become a top-notch official. He really has.
That is weird. That's a weird transition. You don't see that very often. That's very interesting.
No, you don't. But I think it's also something you mentioned being in shape. If you're an NBA player, a former NBA player, we don't see this much in football, right? Because it just doesn't seem to translate over. But if you're a former NBA player that doesn't want to get into the coaching ranks, isn't looking to become a broadcaster or an analyst, what might you do? I mean, being an official would be, I think, a really good way to stay in shape. You keep yourself in the game. You're on an 82-game NBA schedule, which is pretty much what you're used to.
You're making good dough, I would imagine.
It works out great. We've got some big news coming up next on the Sports Carnival, live from the Trauma Center Studios, powered by the Recovery Room. You've been waiting for him. You've been wanting him, and he's actually found a way to join us this morning. The man, the myth, the legend, Bob Iback will be joining us. Stick around back here on the Sports Carnival. The official lending team and mortgage partner of the Sports Carnival is the Midwest Mortgage Team of Land Home Financial. You know I like to tell a joke or two and play around, have fun. But getting a mortgage is no funny business. Don't play around with your finances. Call my good friends, Michael Garcia and Todd Vercuse of the Midwest Mortgage Team at Land Home Financial today. Whether you're buying your first house, maybe you're buying your second house, maybe you're a seasoned real estate investor. Midwest Mortgage Team, Land Home Financial, Michael Garcia and Todd Vercuse. Give my good friends a call today. They're the official mortgage team of the Sports Carnival. Now more than ever, if you're looking to buy or sell your first home or perhaps an investment property, you need a full-time dedicated real estate agent who is up to date on all the latest trends and analysis and is ready to give you the kind of service that you deserve. That's why the official real estate agent and the official real estate partner of the Sports Carnival is Kyle Cable of One Trust Real Estate. Whether you're looking to buy or sell your first home or perhaps you are a seasoned investor, call the official real estate agent partner of the Sports Carnival, Kyle Cable of One Trust Real Estate.
Now back to the Sports Carnival live from the Trauma Center studios, where the only blue chip Dave has experience with involves guacamole and an ice cold Modelo. Now here's your host, Dave Kearney.
Oh, Chad and my little dog Baxter, you really cut to the heart of me. You know that. You know me so well. You're right. I love my blue chips. It makes things seem more festive. You know what else seems more festive, Chad, is the show with guests. And today is one of my favorite guys of all time. I've had more fun interviewing and talking to this gentleman than almost anybody I have ever interviewed in my entire professional career. His name, of course, is Bob Iback, former PR director of the Chicago Cubs, longtime sports author, sports journalist, and proud papa of Kevin Iback, who's the pro scouting director of the Tampa Bay Rays. Bob, boy, that was a wicked end to the season, but you got to be an awfully proud pop. And I want to thank you once again for figuring out a way to join us this morning, man. Really great to see you.
Well, I was moving my fingertips all around there, Dave. I finally hit the right button.
Oh, man. Listen, we were so excited to have you on, Bob. I can tell by the stream of messages that are coming in from Facebook, from YouTube, from LinkedIn, from Twitch, and from Twitter. The audience has just been desperate to get you back and to hear some of your great stories. Bob, I do want to introduce you to my co-host and producer, Chad. Chad, this is Bob. Bob, this is Chad. You know what, Bob? I've talked about you in such, I've talked about you at such length with Chad. I don't know if you'll be able to match up to what I've actually, built you up as, but I'm just so happy to connect you two.
Chad,
Bob,
nice to meet you, man.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm excited to talk to you. And, honestly, I did not realize that you were tied to blue chips until Dave told me about that. And then I did not know that Shaq's character was about Tree Rollins. I love Tree Rollins. I remember watching him on TBS with the Atlanta Hawks for many, many years.
Oh, yeah. I'll tell you what, Tree was some ball player. And when I was interviewing him for the book many, many years ago, he told me stories about how he would have to go to two different restaurants, one in Clemson and one in nearby Columbia. And I said, why did you go to two restaurants after every game? He said, real simple. He says, one of the sugar daddies that was supporting all of our undergoings there would leave 3 $100 bills in the menu at each location, so I could pick up an easy 6 after every game.
That's amazing. Different times.
Not really. Now they just tell you it's an NIL deal. The different times was back then they pretended like it didn't happen, right, Bob? It was supposed to be a look this way, and hey, nothing to see here, buddy.
It was wink, wink. I remember going out to Vegas one time, and when I was actually putting together the book with Tate Slock, the head coach at Clemson, who the book was based on, and it was his confessional. And it was one of those things really kind of funny because I'm out there, and now Tate's was an assistant coach with Jerry Tarkanian. And I know, Dave, you know the whole practice facility out there. You've been there many times. So I go in the room talking to him, and Jerry says, I understand you're doing this book with Tate's. I said, yeah, coach, that's why I'm out here. We're going over all the data that's inside the book to make sure everything is on the up and up and we're okay with everything. And that's why I've flown out here for the week so we can go over all the pages. He says, well, when you get done with the book, I'd like you to consider maybe doing one for me. He says, I'm tired of all these people coming in and complaining that I'm cheating, I'm doing this and that. He says, I've never given any of these players any money, but they come into my offices when they're on recruiting trips, and they always say, hey, coach, the guy over at UCLA or the guy over in New Mexico gave me this. Can you up it a little bit? And I look at it and I tell him, no. I said, I can't do that kind of stuff. So in walks Sidney Green. Now, Sidney, I was sitting behind the door in a lounge chair, and when the door was open, you couldn't see where I was sitting. So he doesn't know I'm in the room. He comes in and goes over to Jerry. Says, hey, Jerry, need another 200 and 300 bucks this week. My mama's coming in. And Tark's looking at me. If he had a towel like he always used to put in his mouth, he would have shoved it right in there. So when so Jerry looks over at him and says, Sidney, got a good friend of mine in the room here. He's a reporter and he's writing a book. So, yeah, I can loan you that money this week if you're out, but I can't give it to you. So he made it really clear. And I'm laughing. When Sidney left, I looked over at Tark and winked. I said, yeah, we'll have to revise that chapter of that book.
And here's the interesting thing for me, Bob.
Great
is that
story.
many years later, I'm at Sidney Green's basketball camp, and it's 1992. And Sidney Green tells me after the camp is over that I'm a dirty player, Bob. He says, you know what, Carney, you're a dirty player.
Which is true.
Which is not incorrect. He said, but sometimes we need dirty players. Bob, that's a terrific story. And if you're new to the Sports Carnival, perhaps you just picked us up on one of our new platforms. This is the kind of great stuff that Bob Iback and only Bob Iback gets to deliver. Bob, there's so many things I'd love to be able to talk to you about, but time constraints are going to kind of make us focus. I want to get your thoughts on the early goings of the Major League Baseball postseason here, Bob. Again, you're a longtime baseball guy. I told Chad about your grandfather's history with Lou Gehrig, and of course, you covered the Orioles. You covered, the Cubs as their public relations director for a long time. But Bob, what are your early thoughts on the Major League Baseball postseason? Anything that's been surprising to you, or is this kind of following your script?
Well, with the Yankees in Cleveland to me is years ago, the Yankees used to say their cousins were the Kansas City A's because they'd play them 20 times a year and beat them 19. I think the Indians and the Twins are kind of like that. So when the Indians beat my son's team, Tampa, the scoreless Tampa Bay Rays, by the way, 15 innings, I was embarrassed to see all the swings and misses in that game. But I said to myself, well, the Yankees got exactly who they wanted. Tampa would have given them a better run. Cleveland, they'll roll over and die. So that series, I think that series can be a sweep. If Cleveland gets lucky, they might win one game, but the Yankees got who they wanted. So that's kind of breaking out the way things are going. Even without Chapman, I guess he's going out to get some more tattoos on his legs or whatever. That guy's a goofball. I saw him when he came here for the Cubs a couple of years back, 2016. Now, the other series, boy, Houston got rescued by Alvarez there in the end of the game with the walk-off. But I still think Houston is the team the Yankees have to fear. Houston can beat the Yankees. The only thing I think will stop a Dodger Yankee matchup, in the World Series might be Houston intervening there. Although, looking in Atlanta last night, they got a great pitching deal from Wright. He rescued them. They needed that game badly, and he pitched a dandy. And then I had predicted earlier in the day that San Diego would at least get a split at Dodger Stadium, which they did. And I think San Diego, if Hader comes on and pitches the way he did last night in relief, San Diego's got a shot to send the Dodgers home.
I watched a little bit of that game last night. I don't know if you saw Manny Machado made a great play.
Reminded me of Brooks Robinson. The years I covered the Orioles, that was a Brooks Robinson play.
Yeah, and then I think he had a home run, and he had a really good night. That was a pretty good game. But the Dodgers, I tell you what, they can get a lot of guys on base, and they can move them around. That's going to be an interesting series. I think that might go the distance.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think it could go 5 games. In fact, I think it will, because I think San Diego will at least split the next 2 games out in their ballpark. But then you got to win Game 5 in Dodger Stadium, so that could be a toughie.
Let me ask you, Bob, real quick, because we're talking Padres here. You, Darvish, and Josh Hader's a name that a lot of Brewer fans are still just really, really upset left this team. But you, Darvish, is a guy that you got to see up close and personal in Chicago. And boy, we talked about it. He looked cooked. What are your thoughts on you, Darvish? He wins the game last night. How much can the Padres really expect from him going further and further into the postseason? We've seen epic playoff meltdowns by you, Darvish, in the past.
Yeah, I think one of the things with you, and this is just my own opinion from having, pitched in high school, he's got too many pitches. He's got about 8 different pitches, and he needs to really fall back on, 2 or 3. A starting pitcher needs to have at least 3 pitches. I look at Tyler Glass now; he's got 4, but he doesn't fall in love and tries to go ahead and make sure he does 20% with this one and 25% here. Go with your top 2 pitches and then use that off-speed pitch to go ahead. I think if he reduced his number of pitches back to 3, he'd be a more effective starter. But you're right. He has not performed well in tight situations. One of those guys that, you look up at the end of the year, he's got 16, 17 wins. But how many of the big boys did he beat?
And that's with you. I think in the postseason, Dodger fans will surely recall that against the Houston Astros just a couple of years ago in game, what was it, game 7, I think, or when they gave him the ball and he just he collapsed under pressure. And Bob, you know this probably better than any of us right now. Some people fold and some people focus under pressure. And that's where I would be concerned a little bit with you. But to the Padres, kind of wrapping that up, they're doing all of this without a Fernando Tatis Jr. who's still on that PED suspension, right? So think about where this team is and where they could be going. The Juan Soto acquisition from Washington was monstrous. I mean, Washington needed to unload salary. I get it. But you put a player like Juan Soto, you've got the Manny Machado, Chad, that you mentioned, making a Brooks Robinson-esque type play. The Padres are coming, and we thought they'd be coming last year, but they're really coming. I still think the Dodgers overall will win this series because they've just got a little bit too much right now. But you never know. The Padres could catch lightning in a bottle, and it wouldn't be the biggest surprise of the postseason to see them beat LA.
And Bob, that was a great point. I never really thought about that. I think a lot of people would think if you've got like 7 or 8 pitches, that's a good thing. But do you think maybe sometimes you can overthink that and you're trying to outthink the batter a little too much and get a little too fancy, and that gets you in trouble? Is that kind of what your point was?
Yeah, that was my point. And the other thing is, too, that you gave up 3 home runs early last night, okay? He has a tendency to give up the long ball, but so does Garrett Cole. And he gave up, I think, 30-some-odd home runs this year for the Yankees. Fergie Jenkins, who was a teammate of mine when I was with the Cubs, told me something that always stuck with me. Fergie used to give up a lot of long balls during his career. But he always said to me, if you go back, Bob, he says, and look at them, most of them were solo jobs. Most of them were solo home runs. And he says, you're not going to get beat by giving up 1-run homers. And I looked at, McClanahan for the Tampa Bay team. And he had a tendency to give up the long ball too, but most of his home runs that he yielded were 1-run home runs. Unfortunately, when the Rays don't score any runs, that can beat you, and that happened to him in the playoffs. Tampa's got, speaking about this Tampa for a second, they've got to go back to the drawing board. And I told my son, you've got to find some ways to get some power in that lineup. I would love to see them get Jose Abreu, who's a free agent with the White Sox, to come over because G-Man Choi is not going to be there next year. They've gotten everything they could get out of him, but they got to get 1 or 2 long ball guys. When Austin Meadows was traded to Detroit, he left about 35 home runs on the table, and then Josh Lowe, he went ahead and had 39 home runs a year ago. This year he had 8. He had the back problems. They lost about 80 or 90 home runs from just those 2 guys. They've got, and Zunino, there's another guy, but he's a swing and miss guy, the catcher, and he's got a problem. I don't know if he'll be back from that injury or not, but he had 35 home runs. So you lost about 110 home runs that you did not get this year. Unless Tampa Bay makes some adjustments there and introduces some power into that lineup, they're going to fall back again because they got a great starting staff. Rasmussen had a heck of a year for them. Kluber will be gone. He's a free agent. They're not going to re-sign him. But there's a guy that I think the Cubs could pick up, as a fourth starter. They need a veteran to show some of their young staff to improve.
Man, Chad, Bob and I were calling this Chicago Cubs season a complete disaster many months before it started. Bob, I'm glad to know that at least in one predictive measurement, we were absolutely right. The Cubs were absolutely a train wreck this year. Before we let you go, Bob, I just want to mention once again, for those that have maybe never seen you, but maybe now they're getting a chance to see you for the first time, some of the sports memorabilia that you see behind me. I've got this Milwaukee Bucks championship individually numbered framed item, and then this Milwaukee Brewers opening day baseball set come from a great friend of yours, Bob, Nikco Sports, Nikco sports.com. You were kind enough to send me an Albert Pujols piece earlier this year. That, my friend, is going to appreciate greatly because Albert Pujols didn't have a good year. He had a great year for the St. Louis Cardinals.
What he did from August the 1st on, he had about 8 home runs coming into August. And for him to end up with 24 homers, which was more home runs than anybody on the Rays had, by the way. I mean, Rosarina had 20 and Paredes had 20. But while you're talking about Pujols, let me give the audience today a real tip on a piece of memorabilia from Nikco Sports that I really think if you want to have a Christmas or holiday gift idea, you're going to want to get this soon, because what they did, Coopersburg Bat Company and Nikco Sports produced a limited edition of 703 baseball bats that measure 34 inches in length. Got a photograph of Albert on the barrel of the bat. Got everything is engraved on the bat, some of his lifetime statistics. Each bat is individually numbered. They're $199. They'll be sent to you in plenty of time for Christmas or holiday gift. I checked in with Nikco this morning. Of the 703 bats, they've got about 60 bats left in the collection. Wow. So these will be gone. You know, people today are shifting over from the New York Stock Exchange to sports memorabilia. This, I think, the nicest item that Nikco Sports in 30 years of being in business has ever done. So here's how you can go ahead and get that. If you're inclined, if you're a Pujols fan or you're a historian, you want to get something extra special for Christmas. The toll-free number is 800-345-2868, 800-345-2868. Go to NikcoSports.com. You spell it Nikco sports.com, Nikco sports.com. I guarantee you, somebody will see this in your home or office and just go crazy. I mean, it is one of the nicest pieces of sports memorabilia I've ever seen.
Well, Bob, I'm so excited to have you back on the program. And again, Nikco Sports, great friends of the Sports Carnival. Stay tuned with us. And Bob, thanks again for joining the program. Stay tuned with us. When we come back, we're going to wrap up shop. I'm going to give you some NFL and college football picks this week. There has been some massive line movement. Stick around. The Sports Carnival broadcasting live from the Trauma Center studios. Back in 30 seconds. Preferred Insurance is the official auto, home, business, flood, and life insurance agency of the Sports Carnival, serving folks in La Crosse and surrounding areas with licenses in Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Iowa. As an independent insurance agency, Preferred Insurance is free to find the very best insurance for you, your family, or your business needs. Call my friends at Preferred Insurance today and set up a free consultation. Remember, working with an independent agency means Preferred Insurance works for you, with you, to find the best solutions at the best prices.
Back to the action live from the Trauma Center studios. This is the Sports Carnival. Remember, excuses are like assholes. Everyone has one, and they are usually full of shit. You hear me, Brett Favre? Now here's your host, Dave Kearney.
Man, I'm just loving this new Sports Carnival. Yeah, we always had fun, Chad. We really did. We've always had fun on air. Yes, we
Neil
have.
in the background here.
Oh, and Neil's just so saucy, so spicy. Oh, man. I got to do those DJ drops for you, Neil. I got to do DJ Neil Duda.
You know, that was my favorite, one of my favorite segments I've ever done doing this. Not just this show, just in general. Bob is great. One of my favorite parts of that is, so usually when you hear the music,
yes,
you to wrap up, Dave starts to wrap up, and then Bob goes, "Oh, by the way, I got a plug." And he goes on for an extra 2 minutes. Classic. But you know, the great thing is we don't have any bosses, and there's no big deal.
That's right. That's right, baby. Look, Bob told me an interesting story once on air, and I know our audience loved this too, about never giving the microphone away. So he was doing a show at a restaurant. I can't recall which one it was because the guy's been all over the country, but it was one in which he was doing a radio show, and Muhammad Ali happens to come in here. Bob, of course, did have producers. Yeah, because, I mean, he's going to it was one of those kinds of shows where you get athletes to come over and whatever. So
Muhammad Ali just drops by.
Just, the Ali just happens to be there. And what's the big mistake that he makes is gives the microphone to Ali. When there is a hard break, the producer is back there. And back in those days, I mean, we're not talking about the kind of slick technical, shit that we got now. I mean, there's like reels flying off of machines and, I mean, people putting carts into places. It was just pandemonium, I'm sure. But Bob knows. You don't give that mic away. That's just one of those things.
I tell you what, there's a guy I could pick his brain all day. I would love to talk to him for a whole hour just about blue chips. I had a couple of questions. I'm obviously when you watch that, Nick Nolte's character was based on Bobby Knight, but I don't know if that was the intent of his book. I haven't read his book, so I'm not sure. But clearly, from a movie standpoint, that's what they did. But boy. And just a wealth of knowledge from baseball. I mean, there's a guy that you could talk to for about 3 days, nonstop about baseball.
Listen, Bob is a guy, and Bob had because he's a former athlete. He basically played full court basketball until he was like, I don't know, 60 some years old, right? So Bob had been up and down the court. So we'd gone through some reconstructive knee surgery at the end of last year. But the full intent of myself and Bob is to have Bob come because he lives in the Chicago area. So it's, a 3.5, 4 hour drive to the Cooley region. But we've had him out here before. I have before and invited him for lunch and had a great time. But we want to bring Bob out to this area and we want to have a meet and greet, a Q&A where we can do that with our audience members for an hour or two. Have Bob tell you some stories in greater detail and greater length than we'll ever be able to get to here on the show. And like we always know, Chad, because you and I have been lucky enough, I mean, really and truly lucky enough to talk to some people that most people never get an opportunity to interact with. When you get these folks, guys and gals that have done whatever interesting thing in their life that's more interesting than what we get to do, when you get them in an isolated situation where they're not being broadcast, where they're not being recorded, where they're not being scribed, some of the stories that you start to get out of these people when they know that there are guards down and you can say whatever you want are incredible. And that's what I really live for, is the stories. That's why I like sports so much. Not necessarily the stats. It's not necessarily the players themselves. It's the stories. Sports and the human story are interacting so much together at all times. That's why I really love sports. It's these stories. It's these stories. Easy for me to say, and Bob's just great at that.
Oh yeah, he can wax poetic for hours and hours and hours. And obviously, when you have that deep of a bucket, it makes life a little bit easier because he's had so many different experiences. And sports is great. Obviously, you and I have played sports, not to the level of professionalism or whatever. Obviously, weren't that gifted. But once it gets in your blood, you're right. In those interactions that you have with people, and it kind of relates so much to life. And then the stories that you see from the professional level and the college level, to be able to watch people to be able to do things that you only wish that you could do. Because when you're out on the court, I can watch, Larry Bird or Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan or LeBron James do all those things. And I know that I can think about it mentally, but I can't do it physically. It's cool to watch and see somebody else do it at a highest level. That's why the WNBA sucks. Sorry.
Listen,
it was not necessary.
It is what it is. It is what it is. You're not necessarily wrong. I think that, that's just, I hadn't planned on talking about that, but the WNBA, not fantastic. How about that? Remember, the NBA is fantastic.
Great.
Not fantastic. Hey, Chad, let's bring up some sports betting lines that have made some major movement this week. And really, in not that much time, we had John Denton, our resident sports betting insider, with us on Tuesday. And we were taking a look at some key NFL and college football games that would apply, at least we would think, to some of our audience members here in the region. And we went ahead and updated these lines this morning. There has been some notable movements on a couple of different games. Everything that you see in green on your screen right now is a line that has moved. We'll start off with the Commanders and the Chicago Bears, Chad. The Bears are a team that I would have loved to talk to Bob about, but we would have been doing hour 2 of the program. So the Bears right now against the Commanders are a pick 'em. Now this game has gone from a point and a half, and it's now moved to just a pick right here. If it were me, after Ron Rivera making those comments about what's the difference between his team and the Cowboys and the Eagles and everybody else, the quarterback, I don't know where Carson Wentz is with Ron Rivera right now. And I'll tell you what, Chicago, They're only averaging like 10 pass attempts a game or some shit. I still think they're going to win this one. I don't like where Washington's at right now. The fact that you can get even money on it, I would maybe make a play on the Bears here in this spot.
I think you're going to have to be a diehard Commander fan or a diehard Bears fan to tune in tonight. This is going to be a garbage. I think the total on this game right now is at 38. I would bet the under on that all day long. It's going to be a snooze fest. I lean towards the Bears. I think the Bears are going to end up winning this game.
I like Bears and under on this one. The 49ers Falcons game hasn't moved. We've still got San Francisco -5.5. The Jets and the Packers. This is interesting. We saw John Denton on Tuesday tell us that the Packers would probably start to see themselves get into the -8, -9 range. What's actually happened is quite the opposite. The Packers are now only -5.5. This number has dropped 2 full points since Tuesday. Now, there is a reason for this game to be dropping 2 points. It's because Aaron Rodgers and Christian Watson have both appeared on the injury report. Now, Aaron didn't practice yesterday, Chad, in Green Bay, dealing with the sore thumb. All reports are that he will play and that he'll be fine. But you have to anticipate this game now being bet a little bit more in the Jets' direction, because what we will see if Aaron's thumb isn't 100%, hopefully, is a lot more of the running game between A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. I can't for the life of me figure out why they don't run this rock more. And I've been saying this since I got here 6 years ago. The best friend to a quarterback, Chad, is a good running game, because what you do, you go hard play action. Look at what Daniel Jones, for Christ's sakes, was able to do with the Giants over in London. He's not a great quarterback, but when you have a good running game that you dedicate an actual game to, you can go hard play action, and it makes the quarterback's job easier. So I'm going to assume this game is closer than we would have liked as Packer fans, lower scoring than we would have thought. And I'm really hoping that LaFleur runs this ball. The Vikings now 3.5-point favorites against the Dolphins. This has moved just a little bit. They were a 5.5-point favorite earlier in the week. The Rams are now -10 against Carolina. Chad, the cleaning of house, if you will, in Carolina. Baker Mayfield's injury leaves a whole lot of questions to be answered. The Cardinals and the Seahawks. This is another interesting game. So the Cardinals are now 2.5-point favorites. You see that number move in green. I didn't actually, and this is my fault, change it to the Seahawks +2.5 now, but that game has gotten bet down to the Cardinals now -2.5. Chad, the Seattle Seahawks are an interesting squad. They don't defend real well this year, which has usually been a staple of Pete Carroll. But, man, they are scoring some points. And I've got to thank myself for picking up Tyler Lockett late in my fantasy draft. This guy's been balling out with Geno Smith.
Well, let me tell you what. Geno Smith is having a pretty decent year. I think he's leading the league at 75.2% completion percentage. And the offense, no problem. Seahawk offense, great. Seahawk defense, garbage. So they have 2 games in a row, 93-point total and a 71-point total. Yeah, fun to watch. But when you lose, that's no good. They can't stop anybody. But I actually see value here, and I like the Seahawks. I like getting points. I'm going to take Seahawks at home.
Yeah, I would. I like home dogs when you can get them, especially if you get the number here. The 2.5 number, it does concern me a little bit. This is when you can go into something that we call buying points. And I would maybe buy a point on this one. If it's at 2.5, I might buy 1 point, which would juice the vig a little bit more in the favor of the book. But if you can get this game at 3.5, I would take it all day, every day. Buffalo, Kansas City, this is going to be the game of the week to watch, in my opinion. I cannot wait to see the Bills take on the Chiefs. The Cowboys at the Eagles, this is going to be, or versus the Eagles, excuse me. This is going to be another really interesting game. Philadelphia is -6 right now. The Cowboys are giving up 6 points here, getting 6 points, excuse me. I like Dallas in the spot. I really do. I think Philadelphia's played great ball, but the Cowboys defense here, they are scary good. And I like Dallas here.
Yeah, I do too. Cowboys haven't allowed more than 19 points this season. And then when you look at kind of who the Eagles have beat, they beat Detroit by a field goal, and they were just shut out by the Patriots last week. They had a win against Minnesota in primetime, 2 wins against, the Commanders and the Jaguars, which isn't anything to brag about. And then you had that field goal situation with the Cardinals last week, which could have tied the game, and who knows where that would have went. And if you're getting 6 points for that Cowboys defense, I see value there. I would take Cowboys as well.
Yeah, I would too. And listen, it's not that the Cowboys necessarily have to win, just don't lose by more than 6 points. That's what we would say. And I could see this game being really close. I could also see Dallas getting Philadelphia. Philadelphia is due for a loss. I know we're running up against it. 45 seconds left. We'll switch over to college. The plays that I like here, there are 4 plays that I've got up on here. UNLV, Air Force still -10 points. USC and Utah are unchanged. I like Illinois against Minnesota. I like Illinois plus the 6.5 points. I believe in Brett Bielema. I believe in what the Illini are doing right now. And then finally, guys, the number has moved a little bit further in the favor of Wisconsin, minus 7.5 now versus Michigan State. I also believe in Jim Leonhard, and I think the new coach of this team, with some of the new invigoration by these players and understanding what they're up against, is going to put Wisconsin in a good spot. I see them running away with this one. I would take Wisconsin minus the points. Good show, man. Good show. It's been fun.
Yeah, you didn't mention Air Force UNLV. I think after yesterday or last week's UNLV, I'm taking Air Force on that one.
Yeah, that's a good call. UNLV still sucks. All right. Thanks again to all of our great sponsors, and thanks to everybody for chiming in here with us on the Sports Carnival. Chad and I back again bright and early tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. See ya.